The canteen felt heavier than it should have. Not from the weight of the water inside, but from the weight of the choice it carried. Caleb Winters stood on the narrow trail that afternoon, the sun pressing hot against the back of his neck, and looked down at the man collapsed against the red stone. Apache. No question about it. The paint on his cheekbones was faded but unmistakable. The way his hand rested near the knife at his belt, even in unconsciousness, spoke of a life lived ready for violence. Caleb's hand moved to his own canteen. 3 days' worth of water if he rationed, maybe 2 if he didn't. He should have kept walking. Every survival instinct he'd learned in 5 years on the frontier screamed the same thing. Don't get involved. Don't take sides. Don't make yourself a target. But the man's lips were cracked, split open in places, and when Caleb knelt down, close enough to see the slow rise and fall of his chest, he heard his mother's voice from a lifetime ago, the last thing she'd said before he left Kentucky. Don't let that place take your humanity, Caleb. Whatever else you lose out there, don't lose that. He unscrewed the cap. The sound of the leather strap against metal was the last sound before silence. The Apache's eyes opened. Dark, unreadable. He didn't reach for the water, didn't speak, just watched. Caleb held the canteen out. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. Then the Apache took it, drank. Not greedily, slowly, deliberately, like a man who knew the value of every drop. When he finished, he handed it back. Still no words, just eye contact that lasted a second too long to be accidental. Then he stood, steadier than Caleb expected, and walked into the desert without looking back. Caleb watched him disappear into the heat shimmer. He looked down at his canteen. Half empty now, maybe a day and a half left. He just bet his life on the humanity of a stranger. And by dawn, he'd learn whether that bet would cost him everything. Caleb made camp that night in a shallow canyon, sheltered from the wind. He built no fire, drew no attention, just laid out his bedroll under a sky so full of stars it felt like the desert was trying to make up for its cruelty during the day. He didn't sleep well. Every sound became a footstep. Every shadow became a figure. But nothing came. When the sun rose, Caleb packed quickly. He wanted to cover distance before the heat became unbearable. He was 2 hours into the day's ride when he saw them. Figures on the ridgeline, not close, not threatening, just there. Silhouettes against the morning sky. He counted 7, then stopped counting. Because every time he blinked, there seemed to be more. They didn't advance, didn't call out. They just stood there, watching. Caleb's hand went to his rifle, then stopped. He thought about the man from yesterday, the way he'd looked at him before walking away. Not with gratitude, not with anger, just acknowledgement. If they wanted him dead, he'd already be dead. He kept riding. By midday, the figures were still there, different positions, same distance, like a perimeter that moved when he moved. Caleb made camp early that night. He sat with his back against a boulder and watched the horizon until the light faded. The figures never came closer, never disappeared completely. On the second morning, something changed. The warriors were no longer on the ridgeline. They were in the canyon, not hidden, not attacking, just present, visible, making sure he knew they were there. Caleb counted 20, maybe more. Hard to tell when they moved like that, flowing between rocks and shadows. His water was almost gone. Another day, maybe 2, and he'd have to make a choice. Turn back toward the last town he'd passed, 4 days behind him. Or keep going forward, toward a destination that felt further away with every hour. But turning back meant abandoning the route, and abandoning the route meant everything he'd tried to build in Arizona was finished. He kept going. That night, he heard them. Not close, but not far either. Voices in the dark. Laughter, once. A child crying, quickly hushed. These weren't scouts, this was a camp, a community. And they had him surrounded. On the third morning, Caleb woke to silence. He sat up slowly, hand already on his pistol, and looked around. The canyon ahead was blocked, not by rocks, by men, warriors standing shoulder to shoulder across the narrowest part of the pass. No paint, no weapons drawn, just bodies, immovable. And in the center of them stood the man Caleb had given water to. He looked different now, stronger. His face no longer showed signs of dehydration. He wore what Caleb recognized as ceremonial paint, red ochre across his forehead, white clay on his cheekbones. Next to him stood a boy, 14, maybe 15. The resemblance was unmistakable. Caleb's mouth went dry. He had half a mouthful of water left in the canteen. Not enough to matter. He could turn around, try to find another route. But he'd seen how fast they moved, how well they knew this land. Running wasn't an option, fighting wasn't an option. The only option left was the one that made the least sense and the most sense at the same time. He dismounted, left his rifle in the saddle holster, kept his pistol but didn't draw it, and he walked toward them. Every step felt like the last one he'd take. His heartbeat was loud in his ears. The sun was already hot, even this early, and sweat ran down his back. 20 yards, 15, 10. The warriors didn't move, didn't shift. They just watched. When Caleb was 3 yards away, the Apache he'd saved raised one hand. A signal. The warriors parted, creating a narrow path through the center of their line. Caleb walked through it. Every face he passed was unreadable. Some young, some old, all watching him with the same intensity. When he reached the center, the Apache spoke. First time Caleb had heard his voice. "You gave water." The English was broken, accented, but clear. Caleb nodded. Didn't trust his voice yet. The Apache gestured to the boy beside him. "My son, we hunt, teach him track, teach him patience." He paused, looked at Caleb. Teach him when to fight, when to wait. He turned slightly and Caleb saw the scar across his ribs. Fresh, maybe a month old. 3 weeks ago, men come to our camp. White men. They say we steal cattle. We do not steal. They do not care. They shoot. My sons try to stop them. His voice didn't change, didn't rise, but Caleb heard the weight in it. 2 sons die that day. This one lives because he runs. I tell him run. He thinks I call him coward. The boy's jaw tightened. He looked away. The Apache continued. I follow the men, try to understand why they kill children for cattle that do not exist. I follow 3 days. No food, little water. The sun, it takes what the bullet does not. He looked at Caleb directly now. You find me, you see Apache. You know what your people think of my people. You know what my people have done to yours. Caleb thought of the stories he'd heard. The raids, the violence, the justified and the unjustified, all blurred together in the frontier's collective memory. But you see man first. You see thirst. You give water. The Apache reached to his neck and removed something. A necklace. Bone and turquoise strung on sinew. He held it out. This is safe passage. Any Apache see this, they know. You are protected. Caleb stared at the necklace. He understood what it meant. Protection in Apache territory. But he also understood what else it meant. Any white settler who saw him wearing this would call him a traitor, a sympathizer, maybe worse. His hand hesitated, just like it had hesitated over the canteen 3 days ago. The Apache watched him, waiting. Caleb thought about the 2 sons who died, the boy who lived and thought himself a coward, the man who nearly died of thirst, trying to understand why his children were killed. He thought about the half-empty canteen, the choice between 2 days and 4. He thought about his mother's voice. He took the necklace. The Apache's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. You choose to see man, not side. There is honor in that, but honor has cost. He stepped aside. The warriors parted completely now, opening the full width of the pass. You can go, we do not follow. But when you return to your people wearing this, they will ask questions. They will not understand. Caleb nodded slowly. I know. And when you come to our land again, we will watch. Not to kill, to protect. But your people will not know difference. They will think you bring danger. I know. The Apache studied him for a long moment, then placed his hand briefly on Caleb's shoulder. The gesture was small, meant nothing to the warriors watching, meant everything to the two men who'd shared water in the desert. "Go in peace, Caleb Winters." Caleb blinked. He'd never told the Apache his name. The Apache smiled slightly. "We watch. We listen. We know." Then he stepped back. The conversation was over. Caleb walked back through the line of warriors, mounted his horse, rode through the pass without looking back. Behind him, he heard no sound, no movement. When he finally turned around a mile later, the canyon was empty, like they'd never been there at all. 2 years passed. Caleb still lived in Arizona, still worked the same routes, still made the same trips to Tucson and back. But things were different now. He wore the necklace, not openly in town. He wasn't suicidal, but he wore it under his shirt, and on the trail he let it show. The first time someone from town asked about it, Caleb told the truth. He'd helped an Apache, been given safe passage. The man spat in the dirt and walked away. Others were less polite. Within a month, Caleb stopped getting contracts from the merchants he'd worked with for years. No explanation, just silence. He understood. In the frontier, you were on one side or the other. There was no middle ground. No room for men who saw humanity before allegiance. But something else happened too. 3 times when Caleb had been caught short on water, when his calculations had been wrong or his luck had run dry, he'd found canteens. Left in places no one would leave them by accident. Near trails he always used. Hidden under rocks that looked natural until you looked closer. Always full. Always clean. Never a note. Never a sign of who'd left them. But Caleb knew. He never saw the Apache again. Never saw the boy. But he felt their presence sometimes. A sensation of being watched that didn't come with fear. Just acknowledgement. On cold nights, when the wind howled through the canyon where he made camp, Caleb slept without waking every hour. Because he knew that if danger came, it wouldn't come from the dark places where Apache warriors moved unseen. He'd given water when he had little to spare. And in return, he'd received something more valuable than any contract. He'd received proof that the choice he'd made, the one that cost him his place among his own people, was the only choice that let him sleep at night. He still didn't know if he'd chosen correctly. There were days when the loneliness felt like a physical weight, when he passed white settlers on the trail and saw the suspicion in their eyes, when he sat alone at the edge of town because no one would drink with a man who wore Apache turquoise. But on those days, he'd reach up and touch the necklace under his shirt, feel the smooth bone and the cool stone, and remember the look in the Apache's eyes when he'd taken it. Not gratitude, not obligation, recognition. One human acknowledging another. And maybe that was worth more than belonging. Maybe that was worth everything. Caleb never became rich, never became respected among the settlers, never had children of his own to pass the necklace to, but he had something else. When he looked in the mirror, weathered and scarred and older than his years, he still recognized the man looking back. That man had chosen humanity over safety, compassion over survival, connection over community. And he'd paid for it. Every day, in small ways and large. But he'd kept the part of himself his mother told him not to lose. And on the nights when doubt crept in, when he wondered if the cost had been too high, he'd remember the feel of the canteen leaving his hand, the weight of the water, the weight of the choice. He'd remember the boy who thought himself a coward learning from a father who lived. And he'd remember that some choices don't have right answers, only honest ones. Caleb Winters chose honesty, chose to see a man dying of thirst instead of an enemy defined by history and hate. And every morning after, he woke up able to look himself in the eye. For a man living on the frontier, where violence was common and compassion was rare, maybe that was the only victory that mattered. The canteen had been heavy, but his conscience was light, and in the end, he'd take that trade.